My wife was 3 months pregnant when a male colleague brought her to the hospital in the middle of the night. Intense physical activity had caused her ruptured corpus luteum and severe bleeding. In the end, we lost the baby, and my wife fell into a coma. I went crazy, hunting down her male colleague everywhere. Ding! As soon as the elevator doors opened, I rushed out, frantic with worry. A figure waiting outside the operating room was pacing back and forth anxiously like an ant on a hot pan. Hearing the noise, he immediately turned to look at me. When I saw his face, my heart skipped a beat, and suspicion instantly arose. I had seen this person a few times before and recognized him immediately. Little Wang, my wife's colleague? What was he doing here in the middle of the night? I work at a hydrological station in the suburbs. With flood season approaching, someone has to be on night shift, and tonight it was my turn. Just 20 minutes ago, I received a call from the hospital saying my wife had been brought in with severe bleeding, was already unconscious, and had just gone into surgery. The nurse unlocked my wife's phone with her fingerprint and called me after finding the contact labeled husband in her call history. I was nearly scared out of my wits. After quickly explaining the situation to my colleague on night shift, I hurried over here. But I never expected that at past 11 o'clock, I would see my wife's co-worker, Xiao Wang, at the hospital. Brotherly, let me explain. Xiao Wang seemed to notice my unusual expression. He paused for a moment, then quickly tried to explain. Why would she be hemorrhaging in the middle of the night? I impatiently interrupted him and asked urgently. She's pregnant. What did the doctor say? Oh well, brotherly, don't worry. Under my suspicious and cold stare, Xiao Wang was visibly flustered. He began to stammer. Sister's son should be fine. The doctor said it's a ruptured corpus luteum. A ruptured corpus luteum? I drew in a sharp breath, my eyes instantly widening, as a ringing sensation filled my head. I never really knew what the corpus luteum was before. Later, when scrolling through short videos, I saw one about a woman having an affair, and her lover was so rough, with movements so intense, it caused her corpus luteum to rupture, and she ended up in the hospital. Since then, I've known what the corpus luteum is, and I now know that thing doesn't normally rupture, unless there's intense external stimulation. Which means, while I was on night duty at the suburban hydrological station, my wife Sun Jia was engaging in intense physical activity in the middle of the night. And then there's this guy standing before me, my wife's colleague Little Wang. What's the truth here? Do I need to spell it out? Li. Brotherly, please don't misunderstand. I'm guessing. Little Wang has also seen that short video. At the very least, he definitely knows what the corpus luteum is and why it might accidentally rupture. And with my current facial expression that must look terrible, along with my cold, piercing gaze fixed directly on him, even a fool could see what I'm thinking. So, Little Wang is obviously getting more flustered, stuttering as he tries to explain to me. It wasn't me. I had nothing to do with it. If it wasn't you, are you suggesting it was me instead? I was stuck on duty at the hydrological station in the suburbs, for crying out loud. I'll be damned. His explanation only made things worse, igniting my fury completely. With a roar of anger, I raised my hand and threw a punch. Ouch! Wang was caught off guard, taking my punch to the cheek and stumbling backward. Brotherly, why? Why are you being so unreasonable? What the hell? ing played with my wife until she bled heavily in the middle of the night, and you still want me to be reasonable with you? I laughed bitterly on the spot, not even bothering to respond to his words, and charged at him again with clenched teeth and raised fists. This bastard dared to mess with my wife? If I don't beat the crap out of him today, then I, Li Dongyang, am worthless. I was furious, like a raging lion ready to tear someone apart. The guy surnamed Wang was clearly terrified. He didn't even bother to explain further, turned and rushed into the stairwell, fleeing for his life. Lucky you ran fast. Just wait. You can run but you can't hide. I won't let you off the hook. I stopped at the stairwell entrance, threw down those harsh words, and returned to the operating room door with anger. The emergency treatment inside was still ongoing. I smoked 2 cigarettes in succession to calm my turbulent and indignant emotions, which subsided slightly. But my mood kept getting worse. Just thinking about my normally virtuous and gentle wife doing something like this behind my back made me feel sick to my stomach. It felt as if I had just swallowed a dead fly. But even so, I was still worried about her. After all, however disappointing she might be, she's still the mother of my child. Right, the child. Only at this moment did I suddenly remember this crucial point. My wife was only a little over 3 months pregnant. With this sudden ruptured corpus luteum causing heavy bleeding, would it affect the fetus? What if the baby couldn't be saved? I shuddered violently, feeling as if I'd plunged into an icy pit, my heart instantly leaping into my throat. For the next half hour, I felt like an ant on a hot pan, completely unable to sit still. I paced back and forth anxiously in the hallway outside the operating room. The moment the operating room light went out, I practically leapt forward, rushing straight over. A nurse pushed open the door and reached out to move me aside. Then the stretcher was wheeled out, my wife's face pale, eyes closed, still unconscious. "Doctor, how is my wife doing?" The lead surgeon was a woman in her 50s. I grabbed her hand and asked repeatedly, "What about the baby? Is the baby okay? What are you thinking? Do you know how serious a ruptured corpus luteum with heavy bleeding is? We could have lost the mother too if things went wrong." The doctor glanced at me, seemingly realizing her tone was a bit too harsh. After pushing my hand away, she sighed softly, her tone becoming much gentler. "Don't be too upset. You can have another child. At least your wife is safe. Thanks to getting her to the hospital in time. Rest assured, your wife is out of danger now. However, she lost a lot of blood and is very weak at the moment. I gave her some sedatives to help her get a good rest. When the patient wakes up, be sure not to upset her emotionally. Comfort her and be mindful of her feelings." After saying this, the doctor shook her head and walked away. The nurse also pushed the stretcher directly to the ward. My face turned pale, my head was buzzing, and I was completely stunned, standing there as if turned to stone. Gone. My child is gone. He had only been in my wife's womb for just over 3 months, still not knowing whether it was a boy or a girl, and now they would never have the chance to come into this world? This blow was too sudden, too heavy for me to bear, especially when I think that the cause of such serious consequences was merely due to my wife's pursuit of momentary pleasure. A surge of overwhelming anger rises in my heart. This shameless, despicable woman killed our child with her own actions. I will never easily forgive her. And that bastard Wang. He knew full well that Sun Jia was pregnant, yet he still let his lust take over, having an affair with her in the middle of the night for some thrill. His movements were even so violent that they literally caused me to lose my child. This is the murder of my child, an unforgivable crime. I fucking won't let him get away with this. That night, I smoked nearly 2 packs of cigarettes. Although there was a companion bed in the hospital room, I couldn't sleep at all and sat at the stairwell smoking. As soon as dawn broke, I called my mother. I asked her to come from the countryside to help me take care of Sun Jia. Around 8 o'clock, my mother rushed to the hospital, her eyes red and swollen, obviously having cried on the way. My aunt came along with her. Sun Jia still hadn't woken up, but I couldn't hide the news about the baby, so I confessed directly to my mother. "What? My grandson is gone." Upon hearing that the baby couldn't be saved, my mother's face instantly turned pale, and she swayed twice, nearly falling over, before my aunt quickly caught her. "Whoa, my poor Gra. Ensign, what sin has our family committed?" She had just sat down on a chair in the hallway when my mother began to wail loudly, utterly heartbroken. Patients from other wards poked their heads out, quietly inquiring and whispering among themselves. A nurse from the nursing station came over and reminded us to keep quiet, so as not to disturb the patients. I was distressed and suddenly thought of that bastard Wang again. It was already almost 8:30 by now, so after giving my aunt a few instructions, I hurried downstairs to head to Sun Jia's workplace. In the 3 years I've been married to Sun Jia, I've visited her workplace more than a dozen times. Most of the colleagues in Sun Jia's department know me, but my expression was clearly off today, filled with anger. The colleagues of Sun Jia I encountered after entering the building all had looks of astonishment, wanting to ask, but no one daring to. "Where is that bastard Wang Su?" After looking around, I didn't see anyone with the surname Wang. I grabbed someone randomly and questioned fiercely through gritted teeth. "Where have you hidden him? Brotherly, are you looking for Wang Su? What exactly happened?" This person was startled by me. Halfway through speaking, he raised his hand and pointed to the end of the corridor. "When you just arrived, I saw Wang Su heading toward the stairwell." This was clearly a guilty conscience, wasn't it? Otherwise, why would he run? Holy crap, trying to escape? No way in hell. I was instantly furious, let go of his hand, and turned to rush toward the stairwell. Unfortunately, although my reaction was quick, I was still one step too slow. By the time I reached downstairs, Wang Su had already driven away and escaped. Judging by his manner, he probably wouldn't come to work for the next few days, most likely requesting leave to avoid the situation. I'll damn well see how many days of leave you can take. You can't possibly give up your job altogether, can you? I was filled with anger, cursing as I got into my car and returned to the hospital. Just as I walked out of the elevator, I heard my mother's roaring voice. My expression changed, and I hurriedly rushed toward the hospital room. Outside Sun Jia's hospital room, a crowd had already gathered. There were both fellow patients and hospital medical staff. My mother's voice was coming from inside the room, occasionally interspersed with my aunt's persuasive tone. I pushed my way through the crowd toward the inside. Just as I reached the doorway, I saw my mother standing by the hospital bed, one hand on her hip, the other pointing at Sun Jia, who had awakened in the bed. She was yelling furiously, "You shameless vixen, you're pregnant, and still behaving this way, sneaking around with men while my son is working the night shift? You two were certainly having a good time, weren't you? Carrying on until you hemorrhaged, absolutely shameless and disgraceful. My poor grandson, gone because of you. You worthless woman. Well, now that my grandson is gone, I don't want to live either. I'll fight you to the end. When she reached the most painful part, my mother broke down sobbing again, shook off my aunt, and lunged toward Sun Jie with outstretched hands. Mom, what are you doing? I rushed into the hospital room in one swift move, grabbed my mother, and pushed her aside. At that moment, the doctor also arrived at the commotion and dispersed the crowd gathered in the hallway outside the door, and severely criticized my mother, warning her that this was a hospital, and if she continued making such a commotion, they would have to ask her to leave. My mother was still sobbing, but had lowered her voice. My aunt took the opportunity to pull her out of the hospital room, into the corridor to comfort her. Only now did I notice Sun Jie's condition. Her face remained pale, her eyes empty, as she lay in bed staring blankly. She seemed not to have heard my mother's angry scolding and accusations at all, showing no reaction whatsoever on her face. Honey, what exactly happened yesterday? I sat down by the bed, suppressing my anger, looking directly at her and asking, how did you suddenly get a ruptured corpus luteum when you were perfectly fine? And why was it Wang Su who brought you to the hospital in the middle of the night? My mother must have learned about this by asking the nurse. The reason she was so furious was obviously because she had the same suspicions as I did. But speculation is just speculation. To determine the truth, I had to hear it directly from Sun Jie's mouth. Even if she was making excuses. Li Dongyang, you don't believe me either? Sun Jie seemed to hear the questioning intent in my words. Her empty, lifeless eyes suddenly focused, and anger showed on her face. We might have arrived at the hospital very late, but when I called him, it was just after 10 o'clock. I was working overtime at home, preparing a proposal. Some of the data wasn't clear, so I called Wang Su to ask about it. Calling about work a little after 10 isn't too late, right? But before I could finish talking, I suddenly felt intense pain in my lower abdomen. I couldn't even stand up, and I started bleeding down there. Wang Su heard something was wrong over the phone and told me to hang on, go to the living room, and open the door. He lived nearby, and said he would come right away to take me to the hospital. That simple? I was skeptical, not really believing it. But Sun Jie's expression didn't seem fake, and I never knew she had such good acting skills. Because I wasn't convinced, I asked another question. So what's this about a ruptured corpus luteum? You were just working on copy at home, not doing any intense physical activity. How cool. LD that caused a corpus luteum rupture. This question stumped Sun Jie. She opened her mouth, but was momentarily at a loss for words. Just as my expression darkened, and I was about to speak again with a cold smile, ready to expose her lies, Sun Jie seemed to suddenly think of something and turned toward the doctor. Doctor, could it be related to pregnancy thrombosis? Do you have pregnancy thrombosis? The doctor seemed surprised, but quickly nodded. Corpus luteum ruptures can be either spontaneous or caused by external force. The latter is usually due to intense physical activity or relatively strong external stimulation. The former occurs when internal blood vessels rupture, increasing pressure inside the corpus luteum and causing. Before the doctor could finish, I was stunned, because I clearly remembered seeing Sun Jie taking medication at home before. At the time, I casually asked a question, and she did mention she was taking heparin for blood clots. So all of this was just a misunderstanding? Including that punch Wang Su took, was it also because I was emotionally agitated and refused to listen to explanations, causing Wang Su to suffer for doing nothing wrong, inexplicably taking a punch from me? Wife, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have doubted you. Realizing I had misunderstood, I felt both embarrassed and ashamed. I apologized to Sun Jie in person, but at that time I was really too anxious and didn't think it through. At the end of the day, it was ultimately because I care about you too much. Wife, please don't be angry with me anymore, okay? Perhaps it was because of my sincere attitude. Or maybe because Sun Jie had not yet fully recovered from the grief of losing the fetus and had no energy to argue with me. In any case, she just gave me a faint look, said forget it, I'm tired and want to rest, then closed her eyes. I don't know if Sun Jie is still angry, but that person in the hallway outside surely still hasn't calmed down yet. With a silent sigh, I left the hospital room, closing the door behind me so Sun Jie could rest peacefully, and walked straight to the end of the hallway. Mom, please don't be angry anymore. We misunderstood Xiao Jie. Seeing my mother was still angry, I immediately explained the situation to her. Finally, I spread my hands. I did see her taking medicine at home, and I asked her about it at the time. She was taking heparin, which is indeed for treating blood clots. You believe whatever she tells you? My mother was still fuming, but her words obviously lacked conviction now. After speaking, she glared at me, then turned her head to look the other way, not saying anything more. My aunt acted as the peacemaker, quietly trying to persuade my mother at the side. Meanwhile, I lit a cigarette, sat on a chair, and smoked silently. Before I could finish the cigarette, my mother suddenly turned back and asked, Edmi, Dongyang, what do you plan to do? Huh? What do you mean, what am I going to do? I was stunned for a moment, feeling completely confused. There was a hint of impatience in my tone. Even before our marriage, my mother had been dissatisfied with Sun Jia. Their personalities clashed, and they never really got along. In normal circumstances, when someone else's daughter-in-law became pregnant, the mother-in-law would have already moved in from the countryside to take care of her. The reason my mother hadn't moved into our home yet was because the two of them couldn't get along. Sun Jia didn't want her to come over, and she didn't want to come over to wait on Sun Jia. During more than 3 months of pregnancy, my mother had only sent over some free-range chickens and ducks from the countryside a few times. But last night's matter had already been clarified. Even if she had more objections about Sun Jia, shouldn't she let this go by now? Don't play dumb with me when you know exactly what I'm talking about. My mother glared at me, not intending to drop the matter. Anyway, I don't believe a word of her excuses. Only a confused fool like you would be so easily deceived. Let's take a step back. Even if what she said is true, so what? Now the baby is already gone. The fact is that my first grandchild is gone, right? Think about it. She finally got pregnant, then suddenly had heavy bleeding and lost the baby. Wouldn't that affect her body? After what happened this time, even if she gets pregnant again, what then? In my opinion, it's still not safe. Besides, as a mother, doesn't she know not to take medication carelessly during pregnancy? It affects the fetus. Just based on this irresponsible behavior, our Lee family cannot accept such a daughter-in-law. After saying the last sentence, my mother nudged my aunt with her elbow. Yes, Dongyang, your mother is only thinking of your best interests, and what she says does make some sense. My aunt obviously understood immediately and quickly picked up the conversation. She chimed in. While you're still young, why not just end things with Sun Jia? I can introduce you to someone else. I guarantee she'll be better than her. What kind of talk is this? Getting married is a lifelong commitment. So how did it become so casual in their words? A wife isn't like clothing that you can just replace whenever you want. Enough, Mom. I know what I'm doing. Don't worry about our business. I was a bit annoyed and casually replied to brush her off. After speaking, I immediately stood up and returned to the hospital room, not giving my mother any chance to continue nagging. What I didn't know was that my mother's earlier comments weren't just random thoughts spoken on impulse. She had already set her mind on this matter. She was convinced that Sun Jia's accidental miscarriage would bring unavoidable effects to her body, and even if she got pregnant again in the future, it would likely be risky. Since she couldn't give birth to a grandson, what use was there in keeping this daughter-in-law? Based on this point alone, my mother wouldn't possibly be easily placated by my few words of excuses. 2 days later, Sun Jia was discharged from the hospital and returned home. Although she could get out of bed and move around, and even do some ordinary housework like cooking, more vigorous activities were still not possible. So she took a few days off, planning to rest at home for a few more days. After bringing her home, I hurried to work. Having already taken 2 consecutive days off, and with it being interrogation period, the office was short-staffed. If I missed a few more days, the leadership would call me in for a talk. The day before discharge, my mother and aunt had already returned to the countryside. I thought this matter was over, but little did I know that the real troubles were just beginning. The afternoon of the discharge day, when I returned home from work, I looked up and saw my mother. It turned out that we left the hospital in the morning, and she came from the countryside right after lunch. Because no one had been home for several days, the hygiene situation was as you might expect. The floor was dirty, and tables were covered in dust. After bringing Sun Jia home in the morning, I was in a rush to get to work and didn't have time to clean. Sun Jia still couldn't do housework, so it was temporarily left unattended. As soon as my mother arrived, she had a dark expression on her face, muttering under her breath while cleaning. I knew her personality well, a soft heart but a sharp tongue. She would do the housework, but she also wanted to have the last word. Sun Jia was subjected to her passive-aggressive nagging until she finally couldn't take it anymore, suddenly exploded, and the two started arguing right in front of me. Being caught in the middle was the most uncomfortable position for me, but I had no choice. After coaxing Sun Jia back into the bedroom, I pulled my mother to sit down on the living room sofa. My tone carried a hint of complaint. Mom, why did you come again? Can't you just be a bit more peaceful? As soon as I get off work, I have to be stuck in the middle playing peacemaker between you two. Don't you think that's frustrating for me? Son, I'm just worried about you. I came all the way from the countryside specifically to clean your place, and now you're blaming me. My mother looked utterly wronged. As she spoke, she began wiping away tears. Look at that wife of yours. Is that how a girl from a good family behaves? A man goes out to work and earns money to support the family, while she stays at home all day and doesn't even clean. Is she expecting you to come home and clean and cook for her too? Our Lee family needs a daughter-in-law. Who can bear children, not some princess who expects everything to be handed to her. Mom is just worried about you, sob. Watching my mother sitting on the sofa, muttering complaints while wiping away tears, I felt frustrated and upset. I know the elderly are just looking out for my best interests. But young people are different from the older generation, Whether it's lifestyle habits or various beliefs, there are differences. Although my mom means well, to be honest, I don't think there's anything wrong with Sunjia. Is it really such a big deal if the house isn't clean right now? Even if I have to come home from work and cook for her, so what? My wife isn't some beast of burden. When she's not feeling well, isn't it only right that I, as her husband, take care of her with consideration? But I can only think these things to myself. If I actually said them out loud, my mom would definitely object and argue with me endlessly. That's obviously unnecessary. Right now I just want to coax her back to the countryside to avoid any more trouble. With this thought in mind, after my mother cried for a while and wiped away her tears, she brought up the old issue again. She mentioned that Sunjia had suffered a miscarriage with heavy bleeding, which had damaged her health, and that even if she got pregnant again it probably wouldn't be reliable, so she hoped I would quickly divorce Sunjia and find someone else. This is something I've never even considered, and it's absolutely impossible. But to coax my mother back to the countryside, this time I went along with what she said, nodding repeatedly without uttering a single word of disagreement. My mother was clearly quite satisfied with my attitude, and finally left with a smile after giving me countless reminders. I heaved a sigh of relief, closed the door, and headed toward the bedroom. To my surprise, the bedroom door was actually locked from the inside. I knocked for quite a while before Sunjia finally opened it. Didn't you already promise your mother that you'd divorce me and find someone else? If that's the case, you can sleep in the study tonight. Sunjia's eyes were red. Clearly she had just been crying. Her expression was cold as she said, "You're the only heir in your family, and I'm someone who's had a hemorrhage and miscarriage. Don't worry, since your family looks down on me, I, Sunjia, won't desperately cling to you. Let's leave it at that. We'll separate for a few days and both think calmly. If you've thought it through, prepare the divorce papers and I'll sign them." Bang! After speaking, she didn't wait for my explanation and slammed the door shut with a bang, locking it from the inside again. "Wife, open the door. Please listen to my explanation. Things aren't what you think. Please open the door." I never expected that my wife, Sunjia, had heard everything my mother said to me in the living room earlier. Now she's clearly misunderstood, and I feel somewhat guilty and anxious as I frantically knock on the door. But the bedroom remains completely silent, and Sunjia still refuses to open the door. After calling out for nearly 10 minutes, my anger starts to flare up. Thinking back on the past few days, what did I do wrong? I carefully took care of her at the hospital, and after bringing her home, I had to rush straight to work. Now that I'm back, I first had to appease my mother, and after comforting her, I have to comfort my wife too. Is there anyone who understands my feelings, even a little? Am I destined to please both sides with a forced smile on my face? As these thoughts flash through my mind, I simply give up trying to explain, angrily cook myself a bowl of noodles to fill my stomach, and after showering, I go to the study. The next day, early in the morning, I deliberately went to check the kitchen. Sunjia made herself dinner last night, but ate it all, probably didn't make much and definitely didn't save any for me. And although she brought the dishes and plates to the kitchen after eating, she didn't wash them, just piled them in the sink. Is she being passive-aggressive or deliberately making things difficult for me? If she can cook, why can't she wash the dishes? I was somewhat displeased, so I just ignored it and left for work. In the evening, I returned home from work. Before I even opened the door, I could hear arguing from inside. It was my mother and Sunjia's voices. What now? My heart sank as I quickly took out my keys, opened the door, and hurried inside. Li Dongyang, perfect timing. Both were in the living room, with Sunjia wearing her bag, looking ready to leave. Seeing me return, she immediately demanded, "Did you and your mother plan this together? If you want to drive me away, just say so. Was it necessary to use such underhanded tactics? Is that what's happening?" I was completely confused and feeling quite wronged. This time I felt Sunjia was being unreasonable. Wasn't she being way too suspicious? So I guessed correctly after all. "Sun Donyang, you've really disappointed me. I can't stay in this house anymore. Prepare the agreement and call me. I'm going back to my mom's house." Seeing that I didn't speak and my face showed some displeasure, Sunjia obviously misunderstood again, her gaze becoming very unfamiliar. After saying the last sentence, she turned and slammed the door heavily as she left, as if venting her anger. "Son, I didn't mean to." Only at this moment did my mother explain to me with an apologetic expression. "I just saw a flower seller on my way here, so I bought a few pots to bring over." It was meant as a kind gesture. Who knew she was allergic to these flowers? Besides, she didn't seem that affected, just sneezed a few times and said her neck was a bit itchy. If she doesn't like them, she could just throw them out. Was there any need to get so angry? Only then did I notice 2 pots of roses placed in the hallway leading from the living room to the master bedroom. I had known about Sunjia's allergy to rose pollen since we were dating. No wonder her reaction was so strong. Just yesterday, I had agreed with my mother about divorcing her and finding someone else. And today there were 2 pots of roses in the house that would trigger her allergies. Who wouldn't be suspicious in this situation? I gave my mother a doubtful look. I tried to recall whether I had ever told her about Sun Jie's rose pollen allergy. But then again, even if I was certain my mother knew about this, certain that she did it deliberately, what could I do about it? After all, she is my mother. With a silent sigh, I rubbed my throbbing forehead, didn't say much to my mother, and turned to go to the study. I had originally intended to call Sun Jie to explain the situation. But after the phone rang twice, she directly hung up, and I felt increasingly frustrated and upset. Son, she won't even answer your calls anymore? Just as I put down the phone, my mother's voice came from the doorway. She seemed very dissatisfied, indignant. No matter what, you are the head of this household, and she, as a daughter-in-law, how dare she put on such airs? Again with these old-fashioned ideas? I was already beyond annoyed. Before I could speak, my mother continued. Son, before you came home just now, I heard her talking on the phone with someone in the bedroom. She was laughing and chatting, even calling the other person Xiao Wang. It's almost certainly that Wang Su. She treats her own husband this way, but laughs and chats with that Wang person. In my opinion, they must be having an affair. Mom, stop being so suspicious. I was really speechless at this point, and impatiently replied. Hasn't Xiao Jie already explained everything clearly? Her corpus luteum rupture was caused by a blood clot. It had nothing to do with Wang Su, and he actually helped us. My foolish son, you believe everything she tells you? My mother still persisted. Do you know how Wu Dalong, the pancake seller, died? Pan Jinlian told him that bowl was medicine to cure his illness, but what was it really? It was deadly poison. Besides, even if you've seen her taking medicine at home, so what? If she already had a condition, couldn't she have been taking preventative measures? What if that medicine bottle didn't contain heparin for blood clots, but just ordinary vitamins? Well, I was speechless. This was the first time I discovered my mother's thought process was so peculiar, with such a rich imagination. Given this fact, I stopped arguing with her, and after dinner, I returned to the bedroom, tossing and turning until I fell asleep. Without realizing when. As for my mother, because Sun Jie wasn't home, she decided to stay over. The next day was a weekend, so I didn't go to work. To my surprise, shortly after I finished breakfast, my mother returned from grocery shopping and had brought my aunt along with her. Accompanying my aunt was a young woman, about 25 or 26 years old, with a nice figure and appearance. My aunt introduced her. The young woman's name was Zhou Jing, supposedly the daughter of one of my aunt's friends. She had graduated from university 2 years ago and worked as a freelance writer. I suspected that all of this had been deliberately arranged by my mother. She had probably asked my aunt to bring Zhou Jing over, intending to set us up. In other words, this was a blind date. But I had no proof and couldn't very well ask them directly. Besides, my aunt wasn't a stranger, and she was visiting with a friend. I couldn't just ask them to leave, could I? Out of politeness, I sat in the living room and chatted with them briefly, then made an excuse to go to the study. I only came out when my mother called everyone for dinner. Honestly, on the surface, the meal appeared quite lively. The 4 people sat separately, with my mom and aunt chatting and laughing, continuously putting food on Zhou Jing's plate. But I always felt something was off, even a bit awkward. This is my and Sun Jie's home, and suddenly there's a strange, unmarried young woman sitting here eating dinner, especially when Sun Jie isn't even here. What kind of situation is this? What I didn't expect was that when we were only halfway through the meal, the sound of the door opening came from the living room. Surprisingly, it was Sun Jie who had just gone back to her parents' home yesterday. As soon as she entered, she looked up and saw the situation in the dining room. She was stunned for a moment. Then her expression changed as she realized what was happening, and she immediately started shouting at me. Li Dongyong, what do you think you're doing? Clearly, Sun Jie was furious, her face turning ashen. She roared at us like thunder. We're not even divorced yet, and you've already brought someone home? Do I not exist to you? Honey, let me explain. I panicked, quickly got up, and pulled Sun Jie to sit down on the living room sofa. That's my aunt's friend's daughter. My aunt and she were passing by our home, so they stopped by for a casual meal. The word, wife, immediately changed Zhou Jing's expression. She glanced at my aunt, then stood up and left with a dark face. My aunt must have hidden the fact that I was married from her. She also panicked, calling out little Zhou while chasing after her. My mother seemed to have a good impression of Zhou Jing and was quite concerned about her. She put down her bowl and wanted to go after them too. Seeing this scene, Sun Jie immediately topped her. Hold it. My aunt can leave, but you need to explain this clearly to me. What's going on now? Before I could process what was happening, Sun Jie took out a small medicine bottle from her bag, along with medical records. She slammed them directly onto the coffee table in the living room. These are the medical records from when I went to the hospital to get anticoagulant medication. It's written in black and white that they definitely prescribed heparin for me. But when I went to the hospital for a follow-up today, the doctor said my blood clot situation hadn't improved at all, but had actually gotten worse. This is why the corpus luteum ruptured. The doctor couldn't figure out why, so he examined my medication and discovered that while the bottle was correct, the medicine inside had been switched. The bottle didn't contain heparin at all, but vitamins that looked exactly the same, which had absolutely no effect when taken. After saying the final sentence, she first glanced at my mother, then shifted her gaze back to me. She changed her tone and demanded harshly, "During my pregnancy, no third person has visited this house except for you two. So, the person who switched the medicine can only be one of you." I was stunned and instinctively picked up the medicine bottle, poured out a pill, and threw it into my mouth. After one chew, it was indeed the taste of a vitamin. In that instant, a flash of realization crossed my mind, and I suddenly understood everything, turning to look at my mother with a shocked expression. Just last night, she told me she suspected that what was in Sun Jie's medicine bottle wasn't heparin, but vitamins. And now, just one night later, it's immediately proven true. How could there be such a coincidence? All this time, the reason she would say such a thing was because she had done this kind of thing before. "Mom, why did you do this?" Realizing this, I abruptly stood up, glaring at her with grief and anger. "Why did you do this? Don't you know this could have cost someone's life?" In fact, it had already cost a life, hadn't it? If she hadn't switched out Sun Jie's heparin, how could Sun Jie have possibly suffered a ruptured corpus luteum with severe bleeding, leading to the miscarriage? Thud. My mother's face turned deathly pale as she collapsed to the floor, frantically explaining, "Son, Mom was wrong. Please don't be angry with me. 2 months ago, when you told me that Xiao Jie was pregnant, didn't I send 2 hens from the countryside? During that visit, I saw Xiao Jie taking medicine, and I was worried it would affect my grandchild, so I secretly bought a bottle of vitamins that looked the same and switched them." "Ha! Li Dongyang, do you see? This is your own mother." Before she could finish speaking, Sun Jie, who had already learned the truth, suddenly burst into laughter, her voice sounding bleak. The expression on her face revealed her hysteria. "Our son was killed by your mother, his own grandmother. I hate her, and I hate you too. I will never forgive either of you." The last sentence was shouted by Sun Jie with all her might, her voice nearly breaking, and tears immediately streamed down her face afterward. No matter how I tried to explain or persuade her to stay, it was useless. She left the house crying. Afterward, because of this incident, Sun Jie didn't answer my calls for an entire month. During this period, I would go to my father-in-law's house every 2 or 3 days, begging for her forgiveness. As for my mother, although I was furious with her, I didn't scold her. After all, I am her son. But I was truly disappointed in her. After my mother returned to the countryside that day, she never came back, and I didn't think about calling her either. To say I had no resentment toward her would obviously be impossible. What I didn't expect was that just when I had been pleading for a month without results, feeling disheartened and thinking that Suanjia would never forgive me in this lifetime, my mother suddenly came from the countryside and went directly to my father-in-law's house. I was at work at the time and didn't know what my mother said to my father-in-law, mother-in-law, and Suanjia. But her attitude must have been very sincere, successfully persuading Suanjia and gaining her forgiveness. Because near the end of my workday, Suanjia called me to let me know my mother was at her house, and also invited me to come over for dinner. Although her tone was still very cold, and she didn't say much else. But just the fact that she actively called me for the first time in a month already explained a lot. After this incident, my mother completely withdrew from my and Sun Jie's life. She seemed to have changed some of her views, self-deprecatingly saying that young people have their own world, and that old-fashioned people like her don't understand young people and shouldn't interfere with unsolicited advice. But she stopped coming to our home. Instead, Sun Jie and I often made time to visit her in the countryside. The mother-in-law/daughter-in-law relationship that had already developed cracks gradually healed. At the end of winter, Sun Jie became pregnant again, and in the autumn of the following year, she gave birth to a big healthy boy. Our family